Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame, and today I chose 3 pictures that I think touch on the idea of challenging me. One of the things that I'm always doing when I take a look at the pictures that get uploaded to the Flickr poll is I'm looking for images that give me different ideas. As a photographer, I can go out there and I can make good pictures, but sometimes I'm making the same photographs over and over again. And though they're kind of refinements of stuff that I've done before, what I'm really hoping for every time I go out is that I really push the limits of my own seeing and the way that I use the camera in order to capture that. But sometimes when I take a look at my photographs, I look at it and I just go, well, there's nothing new here. Which is one of the reasons why I look at pictures of photographers who are not only better than me, but also photographers who are just seeing in a very different way and that really sort of shake things up. And sometimes you can have photographers that do that consistently, but every once in a while you'll see someone who may not be as experienced or has a sort of a pedigree as a master photographer, but who is doing something that makes me think, wow, I never thought of shooting it in that particular way. And I think that's one of the gifts of having this group here, this Candid Frame Flickr group, is that we all have the opportunity to take a look at work that is very different from our own and do more than just simply appreciate the fact that, oh, it's a good photograph, but to really learn from it and to take that information and to go out there and think about, how could I do this differently? First picture we have is by Saimon Hossain, who we've profiled before. He's using a Canon EOS 550D, and this image was shot at 1/6 of a second at 5.6 at ISO 3200. When I first looked at this image and I looked at the thumbnail, I had to take a moment and try to sort of figure out what was happening here. And when I enlarged the image, it was obvious that he had used a relatively slow shutter speed in order to evoke this blur and this motion on this scene with this person with an umbrella walking through a rain-drenched street. And I think I've made this comment before on other images about the idea of using a slow shutter speed. Sometimes I'm so fixated on getting a sharp photograph, preoccupied with making sure that I have a high enough ISO and a fast enough shutter speed in order to get a tack sharp image, because I've hated shooting pictures where the shutter speed is too slow and it ruins the shot. But I never think of the reciprocal. I don't think about purposely using a slow shutter speed because it will blur, because it will make things soft, and that somehow that blur and that softness can add something to the image that wouldn't be rendered if I was using a fast shutter speed in order to freeze everything. And this shot reminds me of that. And I wish I could remember it as frequently as I do when I take a look at the photographs, but I think there are going to be some days where I'm just going to have to go out there and purposely force myself to forget about using shutter speeds above a 60th of a second and force myself to use slow shutter speed and just see what happens. Because one of the things about shooting in this way is that there's a level of unpredictability that goes along with it. You really don't know what things are going to look like when you're using a shutter speed of 1/6 of a second. And that can be a really uncomfortable place to be, especially if, like me, you really like to be as in much control over what's happening in that frame as possible. And I think that Saimon here reminds me that sometimes not being in control can be the best creative tool. I mean, I love the way the look of the image here. I mean, the subject moving through the rain. Luckily, he's wearing some light colored clothes, so his body contrasts beautifully with the dark street behind him. And then you have these highlights in the street, in the water, created by what probably is some buildings and some natural light from the building here being reflected in the water, so it just doesn't go into an inky deep black. And then you have these other blurred figures here in the upper left hand corner moving through the rain, just as our main subject is here. My only quibble here is with this person in the white here, because it competes with the subject here for our attention as they're exiting the frame. So if anything, I would probably darken that a little bit in order to eliminate it, if not completely crop them out. But beyond that, I think, again, this is an image that challenges me to think and to shoot a lot differently. This is an image by Michael Mabale. My apologies if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. He shot this with a Fuji X100T at 1/250th of a second at ISO 8 at f8 at ISO 640. Now this image is really interesting for me because it's a wonderfully layered composition. We're dealing with various layers of elements here. We're dealing with the foot of the steps here where there looks like to be a generator and maybe a gas can and some other things here, like maybe was that a tripod of some sort, surveying tripod? I'm not sure. Then you have the steps and this wall in and of itself, and then you have this another layer where these clothes are hanging from this line. You have this human figure. We have some, I don't know exactly what some of this stuff is, and then you have the sky. And what's cool about this scene, beyond the layeredness of the shot, is the fact that you have all these sort of disparate elements, and that he's bringing together into a complete composition. Sometimes I get too focused on particular elements here. Like I might be drawn initially to the ladder and the pattern that it creates against the wall, and I might be drawn to making an abstract of this particular area of the frame rather than really considering the whole thing. And I think part of it is sometimes I look at a scene like this that's pretty complex. There's a whole lot of stuff going on, and then I want to try to simplify it. And one of the easiest ways that I've done to simplify something is to just eliminate a bunch of things and just focus on one particular element. And sometimes it's a very graphic element, as like the ladder and the pattern and the shadows that are created here, to the exclusion of everything else. But what Michael does here is he doesn't do that. He simplifies the scene, because obviously there's some stuff to the right and to the left and below the frame here that we're not seeing, that he's eliminating. And he's putting together all these pieces as if they were sort of a jigsaw puzzle, and putting the pieces together in a way that work. I think this image has an amazing balance to it. It doesn't seem heavily weighted top or bottom or left or right. And he uses the human element here not only to provide a sense of scale, but to help provide a sense of narrative to the entire thing. Because even though we don't know exactly what's happening here, having that figure in the shot really provides a gesture, an accent, a telling element to the shot that really kind of makes it. Because I can't help but feel that there's a relationship to this fellow and everything else in the frame, even though I don't know exactly what the story is here. But the way it challenges me is to think about when I walk around and I'm seeing scenes like this, to not default to my desire to just simply make something an abstract in order to make sense of disorder. Sometimes I can look at the disorder and think about that as the potential for a photograph. And there's a level of order and disorder at the same time. I mean, all this stuff, all these elements here seem to be organized, but in relationship to each other, there's a sense of disorder. And normally that can make me very uncomfortable because I don't know what to do with all that. But when I take a look at this shot, it seems so obvious to me what to do. And Michael doesn't. But I encounter scenes like this all the time, and sometimes my brain just freezes trying to figure out exactly how do I make sense of all this stuff? How do I put all of it together in a way that makes for an effective photograph? This shot reminds me that it's possible and that I don't have to do anything particularly special. I just have to sort of slow down, take a look at the scene and think about, okay, how do I make this fit? And I'm not talking about how do I just make this fit within the frame, but how do I make all these different pieces fit together in a way that makes sense and in a way that creates a very interesting and beautiful photograph. And Michael does that. Here's another Michael Young. He shot this with a Fuji X-T1 at 640th of a second at f5.6 at ISO 400, and he shot this at sunset, and he captures this street scene and this figure basically backlit by the setting sun. And we all talk about the sweet light that happens in the late afternoon, the golden hour, how we can use that light. And when I have the luck and the opportunity to photograph with that kind of light, I'm often having the light either to my right or my left, because I'm looking to see how the light is illuminating a scene, a subject, or a person. And I'm very conscious of the fact that this directional light really creates some very strong graphic shadows, and I often want to include that as part of what's happening with my composition. So I'm oftentimes sort of already prefiguring how I'm going to be in position to the sun and to my subject matter. But what Michael does here, he doesn't do that. He's actually looking directly into the sun, and he's using this what appears to be a young man walking towards it to be the anchor of his image. And I just love the shot. I love the warmth of the light. I love the low angle that he chose here, which is another thing that sort of pushes my thinking in terms of what I can do with a similar moment like this, rather than shooting eye level. It's like, hey, move down, get down to ground level, get down to puppy level in order to make the composition. Because when he makes these choices, there's a whole different feel to the shot. He's taking advantage of that warm light, but in a very, very different way than sometimes I'm accustomed to thinking about it. He's using these graphic lines of the brickwork of the wall of this apartment, the pattern that's created by these cars that are parked along the curb, the whole graphicness of this tree without any leaves, even the presence of the stoplight and the red light adds a nice complement to sort of the warmth that's produced by the light, and it takes on almost this reddish hue for his shirt. I don't know whether his shirt was actually red or not, but you get the feeling of all this warmth that pervades the entire image. And he has all this negative space because you barely have any detail in the sky. I mean, there are some cloud formations there, but it's very, very little. But I look at this shot and I go, would I have made this shot? Would I have thought to make these similar choices, or would I have been, trying to get myself in a position to take advantage of him passing against this wall and casting a shadow here? Something that I've done countless number of times. But Michael makes me rethink that. Maybe sometimes I need to shoot into the light and see what happens there, not be worried about what's happening with the shadows across the walls or anything like that. Just saying, what could happen if I point my camera towards the light and purposely, create images that are very different from what I would typically seek to take advantage of under similar circumstances. And I think that all the images today really, really do that. And I think this is just a wonderful, wonderful shot. And kudos to Michael and everyone else. So that's it. It's just a real short one, but as I go out to shoot today, I'm going to try and keep these three pictures in my mind as I go out there. Because one of the bad things about, I think, any photographer, but I'll just be speaking for myself, is that I can be a really bad creature of habit. And sometimes I have to break those habits, but sometimes it can be really, really hard to do. But as I said before, taking a look at a lot of the pictures in our group here remind me that there are other choices that can be made and that have little to do with the camera that I'm using or the lens that I'm using. Really, it comes down to how I'm seeing. Can I shake that up? And even if the images fail miserably in my initial attempts to see and shoot differently, that's okay. Because more than likely I'll discover something new from that I'll continue pursuing until I get it right. And that's half the fun of photography. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you like what you're seeing in these videos and you haven't already, please subscribe. There should be a subscribe button right below you. And as well, if you haven't heard the Candid Frame podcast, which I've been hosting and producing for the last 9 years, well, you're in for a treat, because it's over 205 episodes with interviews with some of the world's best emerging and established photographers of every genre: photojournalism, nature and wildlife, portraiture. But even if you're not interested in that particular genre of photography, I guarantee you're going to come away with something from each conversation that's going to be valuable to you. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.